Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it is just past midnight on Wednesday, September the 18th, which means that this is the news for Tuesday, September 17th, 2024, day 938 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. Hey, Fitz. I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv, bringing you all the latest happenings on the ground from Ukraine. And I see the peeps are coming in. Dark Irish is here. Part is here. Hey, Robert Chapman. Hey, Mel. Jonathan Mad Mike is here. Mike is here. Hey, Paul Smith. How you doing? Hey, Bobby. There's Bobby. He's the sponsor of tonight's live, everybody. Everybody thank Bobby for us. Hey, Joe, what do you know? Hey, Cheyenne. Hey, Trash Hunter. Robert Stewart Key, how do you do? Thanks, Bobby. Bobby is the sponsor of tonight's live, everybody. Everybody give him a round of applause. Thank him for his ongoing support. Hey, Arn. Vanetta. Sharon. So the peeps are coming in. So without further delay, let's get to it. This is the news for Tuesday, September 17th, day 938 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. For all my friends in the United States, it is National Voter Registration Day. So encourage those people in your lives who are not participating in our participatory democracy to get themselves registered in time for November 6th, November 15th. I don't know what that is. Is that anything? I don't think so. Last night, you guys were on the live when we heard the air alarms go off, right? Well, it turns out that the Russians sent 51 Shahed drones of the 131, 136 type at Ukraine. 34 of them were intercepted by territorial defense, shot out of the sky. That's a 66% interception rate, which is pretty freaking good. However, it is worth noting that an additional 14 were lost or returned to sender. So 2 were turned back to the territory of the Russian Federation, likely by electronic warfare. Another 12 were lost, likely by electronic warfare. So that's a total of 48 taken out. 48 out of 51. That's a 94% interception rate. It's unbelievable what the Ukrainians are doing and how pointless this continued terror attack against Ukraine is. Every night it's like this, 90% interception. Zelensky said that since the 1st of September, the first half of the month, the Russians have sent 640 drones alone at this country. It is not to mention the missile onslaughts against Kharkiv, against Kherson, against Sumy, now last night against Odessa, which saw a heavy barrage last evening, fires and damage. But I don't believe anybody was killed. Last week, we talked about the downing of the Su-30, right? So they lost another multi-role fighter last week. It was taken out by a man-portable missile. So one of those shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. And it turns out that fighter was one of 2 that were dispatched to repel a daring amphibious raid on one of the oil platforms in the Black Sea. So that $50 million airplane was shot down by a Ukrainian soldier in a rubber boat at sea tackling one of those oil platforms. Now, there are some oil platforms in the Black Sea that are controlled by the Ukrainians. There are others that are controlled by the Russians. They use them as spy posts, as listening posts. They traditionally were unmanned, right? There was nobody stationed there. But after the Ukrainians kept boarding these platforms and destroying all the Russian equipment on them, it appears that the Russians have started to station men on them. And so there was a pitched battle last week between the Ukrainian special forces that attacked one of these oil platforms, destroying the radar installations on it, the listening devices on it, etc., rendering it functionally useless to the Russians. The Ukrainians, for their part, did not entirely take the platform because at least one Russian survived to tell the story. And he complained bitterly on Telegram in a video of the lack of preparedness, the speed and professionalism of the execution of the attack by the Ukrainians. He posted an angry video that blamed the commanders for the lack of preparedness and the lack of necessary tools to defend themselves out there. The Russian equipment on the platform was destroyed, along with one $50 million multi-role jet fighter. So things are interesting in the Black Sea, that's for sure. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine today presented evidence in the form of testimony, video recorded testimony, of two Syrians, a fella named Waid and another one named Mohammed, who were part of a Russian recruiting scheme in Syria. They were recruited to act as guards at a Russian-controlled oil facility. Then they were recruited into that oil facility's kind of private army, the armed guards of the oil facility. And then they were pressured into joining the fight in Ukraine, where they were handed weapons and uniforms and told to go kill Ukrainians. There is good reporting on this. Now, the claims of these men cannot be verified, but they sound an awful lot like the claims that we've heard African mercenaries that have been captured on the battlefield make, that we've heard Indian and Nepalese mercenaries, the claims that they've made, that they were tricked into fighting in Ukraine by being promised guard jobs at safe locations in Petersburg and Moscow. But when they got in country, they found their passports taken from them, a gun put in their hands, a uniform put on their backs, and they're sent to the front. Very similar stories to the Nepalese, the Sri Lankans, everybody else, that the Russians are gang pressing into service in Ukraine. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that claimed the losses of the war are over 1 million killed and wounded. And those numbers, for the most part, jive with what we know. Now, what's interesting here is that these include Ukrainian losses, which we don't often see, right? And according to this Wall Street Journal article, it looks like the Ukrainians have now lost, KIA, 80,000 men. You may remember it's about a year ago that Zelensky said it was 30,000. And given the uptick in fighting, especially in Donetsk and Kharkiv, 80,000 does not seem out of line. It's tragic, of course, but it doesn't seem out of line. 80,000 KIA, 400,000 WIA for the Ukrainians. Now, that's a 1-to-5 ratio. That's very high. That means that the Ukrainians aren't leaving people behind. The Ukrainian doctors are doing a better job of patching their guys up. They are surviving more so than the Russians. Now, remember, in modern warfare, the KIA to WIA ratio that most civilized Western governments find acceptable is 1-to-3. Ukrainians are running 1-to-5, which is very high, very good. The Russians, on the other hand, are running 1-to-2. 200,000. It is estimated that Russia has lost, sent home to Jesus, 200,000 men, while 400,000 have been wounded, the same number as the Ukrainians. It seems incredible that they could have the same number of wounded, but the Russians have 2.5 times the killed. But these findings were published in the Wall Street Journal, along with an estimate that the population of Ukraine has dropped to 25 million. Now, that's only in the unoccupied territories. So Ukraine had a population pre-war of about 40 million. We know that about 7 million refugees are displaced inside Europe. And then the population statistics for the occupied territories are unclear at this time. But it looks, that's huge. To have your country go from 40 million to 25 million is going to hurt. And it hurts everybody. A good friend of mine, her husband is about to come back. He's been away because of the war, but he'll be back in country very shortly. Families are separated, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Okay, on the front line, in Volchansk, the aggregate plant is being shelled by the Russians. So over the summer, we had this situation where there were 400 Russians cut off from the main body, trapped in the aggregate plant, being resupplied by drone-dropped munitions, drone-dropped ammo, drone-dropped medicine, drone-dropped water, drone-dropped food. It has taken 3 months, but apparently the Ukrainians have gotten them all, and they are now in control of the aggregate plant. Engels Air Base was the big news last night. The Ukrainians hit Engels Air Base. Now that's 800 kilometers, 500 miles deep inside of Russia. What they hit it with, we don't know. We assume it's drones. And we don't know what was hit. NASA firm's data shows a large fire on the northeast edge of the airfield. There are some buildings there. It's unclear what those buildings are. And the field adjacent appears on fire. Could have been air defense, could have been ammo storage. We don't know, right? Could have been anything. We don't know if they hit any of the planes, but we have satellite footage. We have satellite pictures of the airbase from just September 15th. And on September 15th, we know there was at least one Tu-22, one Tu-95, one T-160, and then some kind of a cargo plane. Maybe an AN-12, an AN-12, I believe. And that's from satellite footage just 2 days old. In Kursk, in the Lyubimivka direction, there is video of 6 armored units. A Russian armored column was coming in to attack. This is in southern Kursk, below the same river. We're coming in to attack the Ukrainians that had come across the border there. And the entire column was destroyed by the 103rd Assault Brigade. Deep State map says that as many as 2,000 Russian soldiers are surrounded and trapped in Crimea. Now that's Crimea Kursk, not Crimea Luhansk. So there is like with all these towns, I swear to God, there's at least two or three of them, right? And Crimea is a town name in Kursk, Russia, just like it's in Luhansk, Donetsk. In this Crimea, according to Deep State, there are as many as 2,000 Russian soldiers completely surrounded and trying to fight their way out by the Ukrainians. Now, we may end up seeing a mass surrender there, that which would be great, right? In the Pokrovsk direction, there has been no advancement despite 40 offensive campaigns, 40 attacks just yesterday alone. So on Monday, the Russian troops trying to get to Pokrovsk launched 40 separate attacks against the Ukrainians, all of which were repelled and no gains were made. In Sumy, which is the staging area for Kursk, right? It's right across the border. It's where all the troops go in, where everything gets staged before it goes into Russia. In Sumy, they are getting ferociously pummeled by glide bombs. The Russians are just pounding the town. There have been extended power and water outages there. Buildings destroyed, fires raging, and casualties. We talked about the fact that it's National Voting Day. Again, let me remind everybody, Trev the Trev. If you haven't followed Trev the Trev yet, get on the ball there and follow Trev the Trev. This guy's a member of the International Legion. We want to be able to take him live on the show so that he can answer your questions, because he's been in fighting in Chasiv Yar and in Donetsk, and he's a person we want to be able to have as an expert from the front, in my opinion. Thank you, Cheyenne. Trev the Trev, everybody. Give Trev the Trev a follow. Video has appeared of an unmanned ground vehicle. So this is a drone, right? An unmanned drone, but it's got four wheels and it goes along the ground. And this was a kamikaze unmanned ground drone that was equipped with a land mine. I'm sorry, a tank mine. We see the drone drive right up to a T-72 and bang, turret toss, baby. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it is indicative of the kind of ingenuity of the Ukrainians, of the Ukrainian defense sector. We saw that again today. The Ukrainians unveiled their re-engineered Leopard tank. Get this, in addition to a lot of technical upgrades, likely many of which are classified, there's been optics upgrades, which include a night sight so that the thing can operate just as fine in the dark as it does in the day. A kind of a cope cage. I know we laugh at the Russian cope cages all the time, but get this. According to the Ukrainians, this tank now is provisioned with a comprehensive folding mesh screen, which will retard the attack of drones. We'll see. But cope cages on the Leopards. Now here's the big thing. Explosive reactive armor. So at all those points on the tank, 75% of the side panel, all those points on the tank that are susceptible to drone interdiction, they've got explosive reactive armor. Now, it's explosive reactive armor, right? It explodes, but it explodes in a focused way away from the tank. So the whole idea is that when the drone comes in, you neutralize the effect of the explosion from the drone by a counter explosion away from the tank, with a force away from the tank, reducing the overall impact of the attack. So it doesn't, so that's the thing about the Ukrainians. As desperate as they are smart. They get 200 Leopards from their partners. They know that those tanks are not modern battle ready. They're 40 years old. So what do? They send some of them to the front. Then the rest they keep back and they re-engineer so that it's a more comprehensive main battle tank for the field in the 21st century. It's fucking smart. And the thinking is long term. You got to give them credit. We have video of yet another insane Russian war crime. When you have POWs in your care, you are supposed to feed them and house them and take care of them, not summarily execute them. And certainly not summarily execute them with your authentic replica Lord of the Rings sword. I mean, there's video of this Ukrainian POW skewered to the beach, somewhere probably in Crimea, Kherson, skewered to the beach with this. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The Russians are not having a good week. They have lost a number of notable personalities. The very famous drone operator, Goodwin, apparently was a victim of a Dragonfire drone. Alexander Korobev, Crab, and Yevgeny Pohudny, who are Russian propagandists and mill bloggers embedded with Russian forces in Belgorod and Kursk, respectively, were both killed in attacks by Ukrainians. It's unclear whether they were missile or drone attacks or small arms fire, but both of these Russian propagandists are now pushing up daisies. There was another suspicious helicopter crash inside of Russia. This was a private Robinson helicopter that crashed with the CEO of a gold mine on it. Now, that was probably a mafioso-style hit, not politically motivated. Remember, the pie, the economic pie in Russia that the gangsters divide amongst themselves is shrinking every day. And so one of the things that you do is you eliminate the gangster that's in charge of one of the excuses to print money. You eliminate them and you take their assets for yourself. And so many of these defenestrations are just that. They are money motivated as the shrinking pie available to the oligarchs continues to shrink. The 22nd Mechanized Brigade took out a field HQ. It's not clear. We believe that was in Kursk in the Veselaya area. It's not entirely clear where that was. There was a HIMARS strike on a training ground in Donetsk, just south of Donetsk city. There are reported to be large numbers of Russian troop casualties in that HIMARS strike. Apparently, the troops were gathered, the trainees were gathered in parade, and the HIMARS hit them. Ukraine intelligence says that Moscow's, what does this say? Oh, I'm sorry, UK intelligence, British intelligence, is reporting that Moscow's having a hard time recruiting. That according to Moscow's figures, the rate of recruitment has dropped from 1,600 a day to 1,000 a day. And in the words of British intelligence, that 1,000 a day is a likely inflated figure. British intelligence estimates that now the Russians are recruiting at a rate of about 28,000 a month. So less than 1,000 a day, less than the 30,000 that they need to replace the 30,000 in troop losses that they suffer every month on the front line, leaving a deficit of 2,000 minimally, 2 to 5,000 minimally. They went on to say that this has led the Kremlin to increase the signing bonuses to unsustainable levels, that currently military personnel payments are now 8% of the federal budget. I'll say that again. Payments to military personnel are now 8% of the federal budget for the Russian Federation. Now, by comparison, the United States military, which has about as many men in it, about 1.4 million active duty service personnel, makes payments to those military personnel totaling $687 billion a year, way more than the Russians are spending, about 3 to 1. However, that is only 0.11% of our federal budget, as opposed to what the Russians are shelling out, 8%. It's unsustainable. You can't spend 8% of your budget on your military personnel and think that your society is going to survive. It's not. It's just not. Now, further to this, Putin has, on top of this news, Putin has authorized an increase in the size of the Russian army by 180,000 to 1.3 million active duty servicemen, 2.2 million with reserves. This is a total expansion this is the third time that he has done this since the war started. This is a total expansion of over 350,000 men added to your military service. Nothing says my 3-day military special operation is going swimmingly like having to expand my army by 45% of its original size. Can anybody in the Russian Federation do fucking math? I mean, can nobody crunch these numbers like we are here? No, the interest rate is 19%, Ant. So, Ant, the core overnight bank lending rate in Russia was raised on Sunday to 19%. The official figure for inflation in Russia is 9.1%. But Hankies, which is the inflation calculator and indexer over at Johns Hopkins University in the U.S., widely considered in the world to be the foremost authority on this subject, believes that, in fact, inflation in the Russian Federation is running closer to 27%. 27%, can you imagine? I have a correction from last night. Last night I reported that Germany was going to sell some new guns to Qatar, and Qatar was going to pass on a dozen older self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine. It turns out that initial reporting was incorrect. The number is, in fact, 24 PZH, Panzertier howitzers, something like that, PZH 2000s. These self-propelled guns, 6 of them will be delivered to Ukraine within the next 2 months. Another 6 by the end of the year. The other 12 apparently have to go back to Germany for refurbishing, repair, etc., before they are sent here in 2025. So still, 24 self-propelled guns coming from Qatar, an Islamic state that has not provided any lethal aid to Ukraine, though it has been, along with the UAE, instrumental in negotiating more than one prisoner swap. And so while most of the Muslim world has remained fairly neutral in this conflict, or even close to and enabling Russia, Qatar is breaking from the pack and sending a bunch of guns. Good for Qatar, as far as I'm concerned. Zelensky was complaining bitterly that he has 14 brigades of reservists ready to go, but only enough equipment for 4 of them. And despite what we have heard about problems with recruiting in Ukraine, he made the claim that manpower is not his problem. Equipment is his problem. And he urged Western allies to fulfill the commitments they have made for the delivery of weapons in short order. I want to highlight for everybody who is, guys, we got to stop blaming the United States for everything. All of these bitter recriminations that I hear from our friends have got to stop. It is nonsense. It is what the Russians want. One of the people that I met here on TikTok, who I thought of as a friend, blocked me because I had the nerve to suggest that the British government could go it alone on storm shadows, that they could grow a pair and they could tell the Ukrainians, here's the storm shadows, use them how you want. And I was told that is a lie, that the storm shadows can't be used because the Americans have export controls over them and won't let them be used. That is bullshit of the first order. And you know how I know? Because Boris Johnson and 5 former defense ministers of the UK, including Grant Shapps, wrote a letter to Keir Starmer urging him to go it alone. To fuck the Americans, fuck the French, fuck the Italians, and lead on this thing. Anytime the UK wanted to grant permission, they can. So rather than everybody pointing the finger at the United States and vilifying the United States over everything, see to your own house. See to your own houses. Call your MPs. Call your office of the Prime Minister. Get it together. Because all you're doing by burying your head in the sand about your own government and pointing the finger at the U.S. is playing into the hands of the Russians. God damn it. I give the British a lot of credit. They're doing the right thing. Democracy is hard. It depends on consensus. And they're looking for consensus from their partners. How Italy is a partner, I don't know exactly in this thing. The Franco-British alliance that built the storm shadows, that I understand. Built ITAR-free, by the way, so that the U.S. can't say shit about how they get used or where they get exported. But there is a political necessity with the U.S., right? It's the U.S. We got the juice. It's just that simple. So all of that I understand. Why Rome is involved, that I do not understand. It could be that there is some critical piece, some intelligence asset, some programmatic function that the Italians serve. I don't know. But it is telling that Keir Starmer, for his part, after flying to D.C. to speak to Biden, where did he go next? Right to Rome to speak with Giorgia Meloni, who in a press conference afterward said that she supported long-range storm shadow strikes deep inside of Russia. as did NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who urged Rome, Paris, London, and DC to lift restrictions on long-range strikes inside of Russia. This sentiment was echoed by UN Secretary General, who says that war must end with Ukraine intact and enforced, or rather reinforced, the notion of the UN Charter's territorial integrity, that is, the sovereignty of nations. Bobby, where is France in all of this? That's a great question. So the Storm Shadows are an Anglo-Franco project, right? Developed between Paris and London. So control over them is as much Paris's responsibility as it is London's. The Macron government has been badly weakened in this last election. And one of the people that Starmer spoke with recently was Marie Le Pen, who is the head of the far-right party that may well replace Macron, though that is unclear to me. Now, the short answer to your question is it's all so unclear. I think that needle is being threaded now. But I think there's a good chance that the French will come out in favor of long-range strikes. I believe Macron has already said he's in favor of it. The problem is he's not as in charge, if you will, as he was a couple months ago, before the elections. Somebody said down there that Ukraine should have nukes. Why? Why? What good would nukes do? The last thing the world needs is more nukes. A nuke is not going to help anybody in this situation. And that's why the Russians are never going to use them. The Russians have two choices, right? They could use a short-range tactical nuke, which will give them no advantage on the battlefield and turn their chief partners, China and India, against them. Or they could use the entire arsenal of strategic nukes and try to destroy the United States and Western Europe, effectively bringing Armageddon to the world and destroying everybody. The only time that nukes work is when you don't use them, when you bluster and blow that you're going to nuke everybody, and Western leaders get afraid and create imaginary red lines for themselves. So nukes don't do anybody any good. And lately I've been seeing a lot of calls to give Ukraine nukes. I have to assume that's some kind of Russian troll bot farm talking point. Maybe they're hoping if we give the Ukrainians nukes, the Ukrainians will use it first. Some bullshit. Ant says, but if Ukraine kept the nukes as before Budapest Memorandum, Putin would never have invaded. And it's my opinion, if you hadn't given up the nukes, you'd have never gotten out from under Russia's thumb. If Ukraine was nuclear armed, you think the Russians would have ever given you up? No. No way, man. They'd have been in here all over this government. You'd have never had a 2014 revolution of dignity. You'd be like Belarus, absorbed into the Russian Federation. I absolutely believe that the worst thing that Ukraine could have done was hold on to those nukes. Nobody should have any recriminations about giving them up. It was the right thing to do. So everybody's on board. NATO Secretary General, UN Secretary General, Maloney in Italy, Starmer in London. We think Macron in Paris. And so it is just Biden we are waiting on. I'll give you that much. Hungary blocked the use of frozen foreign assets to pay Ukraine. So the EU is putting together 40 billion in loans, 40 billion euros. And in the meantime is sending 1.4 billion euros in interest from the frozen assets to purchase weapons for Ukraine. Germany is ponying up 100 million euros in winter aid to help Ukraine get through the winter. France is sending 19,000 tons of railroad track. Now, this is important because many of us know, I'm sure, that the Soviet gauge, rail gauge, is what they call 13 gauge. The European rail gauge is 14 gauge. So railroad cars from post-Soviet states, when they get to European rail track, have to actually change their wheels. They have to change the base that the car runs on when they go to the new track. So this 19,000 tons of railroad track will help Ukraine upgrade its rail infrastructure to be European compliant 14 gauge track. So that's good news for everybody. The Russians are putting nails through the blades, the copter blades of the drones, like the goddamn wheels on chariots. You know, they used to have those spiky things that came out so you could hit the wheels of your opponent's chariot. So I want to say this. Think about the elegance of these solutions. The Russians are putting nails through the blades of the propellers with the idea that they then fly into Ukrainian drones kamikaze style and wreck the propellers. So one use only. And they have to add the nails, which adds weight, which shortens flight time and everything, right? Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are taping a stick on the front of the drone, and they fly the stick into the propellers. If the stick breaks, nobody cares, and it doesn't destroy the Ukrainian drone. But it's very effective against the Russian reconnaissance drones. It is a less technical, lighter solution that doesn't destroy the drone. And it goes to the point, I think, that the Ukrainians really do. Ben-Hur style dive hard, remember? It goes to the point that the Ukrainians really tend to have more simple, elegant solutions than the kind of barbarous ones we see the Russians applying. Finally, Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, as the Americans know them, have pulled out of the Russian Federation, which is a shame because they did a lot of good for the Russians. But they can no longer continue to operate there without a fear of their people being arrested, charged with sabotage, espionage, accused of crimes, locked up, face long prison sentences. Essentially, Doctors Without Borders has said, we will not be hostages. We will not be part of the new hostage diplomacy that the Kremlin is engaged in. And that's where we're at with that. Okay, so guys, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to thank the moderator team, best moderator team on the Tickety Talk, Cheyenne, Vanetta, PT, John, Jay, and Travis. I also want to thank Lars, who has the Discord server and the Alexievich archive. I want to thank Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces, where these lives get reposted. Big thanks to Bobby, who is the sponsor of tonight's live. Chris, if you missed tonight's live, don't worry about it, man. I'll have it posted within a couple hours on the Peter's Peeps public group on the Book of Faces, and you can watch it there. I wish the recordings grabbed the chat. I don't understand why they don't do that. It's really annoying, I think. So, questions, comments, points of observation, or personal need. Again, everybody thank Bobby for tonight's live sponsorship. What's the latest with ATACMS in Kursk? So, guys, here's the thing. I try to be honest, as honest as I can be. I try to be fact-based. Now, as far as I know, the very first use of ATACMS on Russian soil was against troop concentrations in Kursk over this past weekend. As far as I know, that's the first time long or short range, these were short range ATACMS fired by a HIMARS. As far as I know, that is the first time that they were used on Russian soil. And I made a big deal of it, and I think it's a big deal. But I have to tell you, nobody else is talking about this. Not another single person who covers Ukraine is talking about this. So it makes me think that maybe I was wrong, that maybe I misunderstood the prohibition on ATACMS, that short-range ATACMS were just fine for use on the territory of Russia. Maybe I got it wrong. I don't really know. But it does seem unlikely that I alone, of all the people watching this conflict, managed to figure out, a covert agreement between Rome, Paris, London, and D.C. for boiling this frog for long range. Like, that doesn't make sense. So maybe I just got it wrong about the use of short-range ATACMS in Russia. And it's not a big deal. I don't honestly know. I'm sure I had that right, that ATACMS were prohibited inside Russia. They used HIMARS in Kharkiv, Russia area. HIMARS was okay to use in the Kharkiv advance, yes. So Ant says Odessa is under. We don't have an air raid here. I have not, at least I have not heard a siren. Oh, cool. Thanks, Deathcore Dad. You have in the Oblast, so there's an air alarm on for Kyiv Oblast, not the city. Well, that encompasses the city. I didn't hear any sirens anyway. Maybe we have one on, but I didn't hear any sirens. Hey, Samso. Will it help Ukraine to go downtown Moscow with long range? I don't know the answer to that. That kind of thing can get a real rally round the flag, patriotism kind of thing going. I mean, if the Ukrainians sent a ballistic missile and blew the dome off the Kremlin, would it inspire the Russians to rally around Putin and strengthen his cause? Or would it freak everybody out so much that they would have to take Putin out? I don't know the answer to that. Got to hit the stuff that keeps the war machine going, degrade their ability to prosecute this war. I agree. Pagers are now off the sanctions list to Russia, along with the abacus. Yeah, Chef Deb, I tend to agree with you. Chef Deb says, I don't think Ukraine would do that. Targets like infrastructure, not people. Although the Kremlin itself is the hive mind of the Russian Federation, and it is a symbol of Russian power. It should be targeted, in my opinion. It should be burned to the ground. What else? Oh, sorry. Did I miss something here? So yeah, yeah, guys, I honestly don't know if I got the whole ATACMS thing wrong or really right. I know the facts. I am certain that ATACMS use was prohibited inside Russia, but we are now seeing short-range ATACMS used in Russia. Could this be the first step to long-range ATACMS? And I rather think it is. Mojave Mike, my guess is 36 months after the defeat of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, that the Federation will have 36 months of looking something like it does now before it becomes completely unrecognizable as Russia. Truth hurts. We always start at 10 p.m. UK time, except for that 2-week period where the UK and Ukraine are different because of daylight savings time. There's like 2 weeks delay. But other than that, we always start at 10 p.m., but it doesn't matter because lives are always posted immediately after the live, or I try to immediately after, on the Peter's Peeps public group on Facebook or on YouTube. They're posted both places. So for anybody that misses a live, you can be sure it will be posted shortly within a couple hours. I try to get it done on YouTube and on the Book of Faces. What is the state of Ukrainian logistics for the war effort? The Ukrainians are great at logistics. And their ground lines of communication are all inside their own country. So they don't have partisans to worry about, sabotage units, and that kind of thing. Not the way the Russians do in the temporarily occupied territories. That's for sure. Well, Dark Irish, you got that auto tapper, right? I think it's so crazy that there is such a thing on the market. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. I think the whole thing's ridiculous. Some of you have asked about the next improv because we took August off. We were scheduled to do something the 28th, but we just got word from our venue. We lost our venue. They are doing renovations. And so we've had to move it. We're scrambling now to find a venue for our next improv comedy. No, the Russian counteroffensive in Kursk is bad. It's going very badly for the Russians. And it's probably going to result in maybe as many as 2,000 captured Russians. There are right now 2,000 Russian soldiers trapped, surrounded by the Ukrainians, north of Sudza. Then there's another estimated 3,000 trapped below the same river. That's 5,000. That's a tenth of the total force sent to Kursk that's currently trapped. It is not going well. Hey, Jason Willis Starrin, how you doing, pal? I don't know if you popped up there because you just popped in, but you have popped in just as we are saying goodnight, pal. So, guys, that's it for the Live at 5 from Kyiv. I'm Peter Alexievich. It's 1 a.m. here. I appreciate everybody out there being there for me. Because you are there for me, I can be there for you. I can be here for you. And it is my distinct pleasure and privilege to be here in Kyiv among these folks at this critical time in history. So thank you all so much. I'm going to hit the hay. Make it a great day.